what I love about this is because it's out of the box, anything that you can take the burden off the developer for is a great thing. And so, developers aren't identity specialists, much like identity specialists aren't app developers. So
hello again, and welcome to another episode of our 425 show in our monthly series of what's new in Microsoft Entra ID. If you're new here, then welcome. If you're a return viewer, then thanks for coming back. Today we're going to discuss October 2023. I can't believe it's October already. My name is Jorge Lopez. I'm a senior product manager in the Identity Customer Experience team. And with me, it's always a pleasure. I have Grace speaking as well. Grace.
Hi, I'm Grace Picking, and I am the same as Jorge, just with slightly larger hair and based in England.
Of course. So before we kick off, I want to bring your attention to some of the changes in our terminology to align to Microsoft Azure, because we're going to be discussing some public previews. And previews are provided as is with all faults, and it's as available as described. Unless otherwise noted on a separate agreement, previews are not included in the SLA for corresponding online services. So that's important and may not be covered by customer support. We may change or discontinue previews at any time without notice. And we also may choose not to make preview services generally commercially available. So that's kind of a little bit of the housekeeping here. But if I would tell the audience that I didn't read this and I actually memorized it, would you think they believe me, Grace?
Dunno, maybe. I don't know. When did you last sit a bar exam for your legal terminology?
Absolutely. All right, so let's start over. So I think, Grace, do you want to take it from here for the next few things that we want to discuss?
Sure. So we're going to flip the previews round today. We previously went through GA, then public preview, but we have a special guest today. So we're going to start with the public previews for this month. So as you will see, come into my, there in the middle, we have Louise with us. So I'm going to first of all run through privilege roles and permissions in Entra ID, and then Louise is going to take us through the exciting world of Azure and our new ABAC preview. So I'll kick off with privilege roles and permissions in Entra ID. So we've just gone public preview with the ability to allow you to easily identify which custom and built-in roles and permissions and role assignments are privileged using the admin center. So you can see it directly there, but you can also get to these through PowerShell and through the Graph API access as well. So this provides you with guidance for best practice for privileged roles. So the reason why we wanted to bring this to the forefront is it's so easy, especially for customers that have been on their cloud journey for a really long time when it comes to IDP and, of course, Microsoft Entra ID, is as you start adding more users, more applications, as we add more out of the box roles in ABAC, it is pretty easy for permissions to be kind of handed out without necessarily being removed or given out for things like projects. And then that account has not had those permissions removed at the end of the project. So this highlights to you explicitly what we would refer to as a privileged role within Microsoft Entra. And those include the default ones, which you can have a look at on our standard RBAC like kind of documentation. So you can read more about this preview at aka.ms/425show/privileged roles preview. And just as a reminder, what we recommend is when you have a look at this and you review it, we always think you should apply the principle of least privilege. I know that's really hard when you've potentially got an architect or a SecOps person or a developer that's just saying, no, I must have this read, write, access all, I must have godlike privileges. Please challenge that, because over permissioning can be potentially quite dangerous, either accidentally, if someone presses a button they don't realize, or maliciously. So always apply the principle of least privilege. Use PIM or privileged identity management to grant just-in-time access where you can if you're licensed for it. Make sure you turn on multi-factor authentication for all your admin accounts. Make sure you're configuring recurring access reviews as well to revoke unneeded permissions. And generally, depending on the size of your organization, we do recommend, you've probably heard this golden number before, that you limit the number of global admins to less than 5. In an ideal you'd have one and it'd be completely in a closed box break glass solution, but appreciate that sometimes operationally isn't possible. And then we also recommend that you limit the number of privilege role assignments to less than 10. Moving on to our next exciting update today, which is why we have Louise with us, is we have just announced public preview for Delegate Azure role assignments with attribute-based access control conditions. Now, I will admit, I spend 95% of my time talking about Microsoft Entra ID, and the other 5% of the time I'm probably talking about my dog, to be honest. So I very rarely explore the world of Azure unless it comes to talking to my customers about their applications, their various different workloads they have in Azure. And that's when I really started to open my eyes about, the different roles and responsibilities and where, people need the flexibility to be able to control these and delegate them. And so today I'd like to introduce Louise. Louise, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hey, everyone. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm very excited to be on the show. I'm Luis Leon. I'm product manager on Azure ABAC, so on the authorization side of the Azure side. So I work with all the resource providers in Azure, like virtual machine, key vaults, that we provide this platform for authorization for those services. So very related to what you were talking about, the other preview on Entra ID. I do something very similar, but on the Azure side.
Fantastic. And so I'll say the spiel and then you can give us a deep dive, because as I mentioned, I'm not an Azure expert, and this is a really exciting feature for a lot of my customers that are getting that pressure to provide the right level of access to their delegates across the organization. So this feature is to enable the cloud administrators to grant the ability to assign Azure roles while adding restrictions on the roles so that they can assign and who they can assign those roles to. So for example, you could allow an admin to create Azure role assignments for VN contributor and reader role only. So over to you, Louise. So tell us a little bit more about this and why we kind of developed it and how it works.
Yeah, so this is very, very, very related to what you just were mentioning in the other preview, Grace, on Entra ID, how we now classify roles and permissions as privilege, right? One in the Azure role, one permission that is very, very privileged, it's the permission to create role assignments, right? And this is a permission that it's in very privileged roles, like the owner role, the user access administrator, and a recently introduced ABAC role. What this does is that these allow members, principals. When I talk about principals, I refer users, groups, or service principals that have those roles. It grants them the ability to create role assignments. So if we see in the like in the picture, like if I'm Alice, I'm an administrator, I'm a user access administrator, owner. If I want a data to be able to create role assignments, then I will have to grant data the permission to create role assignments as it is, very privileged. But what we have is that customers say to us, hey, like I have these developers that need to create role assignments in order to grant permissions to this managed identity to be able to, I don't know, like access and storage, to be able to pull images from an Azure Container Registry. And then my only option, or the option I have, it's either I grant them the permission to create role assignments, which is super privileged. So now they can not only grant permissions to the managed identity to access the storage, but now they can also grant owner to anyone, right, in the organization. Or I take all these requests myself. But, like imagine hundreds of developers requesting to create role assignments. That creates a bottleneck and like overhead for these admins. So what we introduce now is that Alice will be able, as a cloud administrator, to say to data, okay, if you only need to be able to create role assignments for these specific roles, then I just grant you that permission. Grace, you were talking about, like the less privilege, right? Like that mentality of less privilege. So this feature is what enables, right? Like now administrator, the central team can say, okay, I just grant you the exact things that you need. And not only we are restricting or constraining on roles, but you can also say, okay, data, you can only assign ACR pull and CR push, which are 2 roles, and only to service principals, right? Like you cannot assign it to users, you cannot assign it to groups. You can only assign it to service principals. So that way we are empowering the central IT, the cloud administrators to have this less privilege, like mentality. And why we introduced this feature, there are multiple scenarios where this is useful. I mentioned one of them. You have, for example, like pipelines that deploy resources, right? You have automation workflows that, like create subscriptions and then deploy initial resources. You can grant those pipelines the permission to create role assignments only for the things that you need, right? Like that subscription needs. You don't need to grant them the owner. You don't need to grant them the full permission to create role assignments, right? You can limit those permissions. At the same time, if you have developers who need to deploy ARM templates, and they, as part of that deployment, they need to create role assignments, then you can grant those developers that restricted the constraint permissions to create role assignments. And another scenario is also in Azure, we have this distinction between control plane and data plane. It means that, let's imagine that I have the VM contributor, and then I'm able to create virtual machines, right? In Azure, we have the capability that you can sign in to the virtual machine using Entra credentials, right? So you don't have to use local account, you don't have to use keys, or you can use your Entra credentials. But to be able for that creator of the virtual machine to access the virtual machine using Entra ID, they need the ability to create role assignments, right? Because they need to assign the user login admin or I think it's called the admin login role, right? Like, so you need the ability to create role assignments. So in the past, it means that you will have to grant them very powerful permissions so that they can manage access to that VM. Now you can say, okay, I grant you the VM contributor, and at the same time, I grant you the ability to create role assignments for these only 2 roles so that you can manage access to the VM.
That's fantastic. So in terms of our customers, so my Azure skills and knowledge are pretty low. So would you say, does this cover all of the roles in terms of being able to delegate those Azure roles? Is it all Azure roles that they can delegate, or is there certain segments of them?
Yeah, this is a good question, because you can delegate all Azure roles, and I mean built-in and custom, right? Like if you have custom roles, you can also specify, like, oh, I only want these custom roles to be assigned, right? Like I don't want anything else, so that you can use built-in and custom roles. And actually, I want to add something. So you were mentioning about privilege roles on the Entra ID, right?
Yeah.
So for example, as I mentioned, like the user access administrator, it's a privilege role, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I grant Jorge, let's say the user access administrator, it means that role assignment, it's a privilege role assignment, right? But if I use this feature and then I just say, okay, I assign you the user, the UAA, the user access administrator, but I add conditions to what you can assign, it means that role assignment is no longer privileged, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
so that's
cool.
how you use this feature to reduce privilege in your environments.
Fantastic. And so with this then, given that it's currently in preview, how do you recommend customers go about reviewing their existing permissions? Is there a way for them to easily do that, or would it just be a case of going, resource by resource and reviewing, because of course they're really the people that are only going to know whether they're overprivileged?
Yeah. So right now in our team, one our top of mind thing is how do we help customers to reduce privilege, right?
Mhm.
You saw it in Entra ID, and we're doing something very similar on the Azure side. So if you go to the Azure portal, you will see we're like trying out things on the Azure portal where we show you, hey, here are your privilege role assignments, right? Like, and we kind of like have filters that you can use to filter your role assignments. So one action that you can take first is, think about, does the user needs this role assignments that are privileged, right? Do they need it or not? And then, like maybe you can remove them. But
Okay, fantastic.
that you can do it, okay, I'm going to add conditions, right? Because probably they don't need the full permission to create role assignments, right? Like there is some sort of like a constraint I can add to it. So you can go to the Azure portal and get, right now, I think it's available. You can go there and get that insights into what role assignments are privileged.
Fantastic. And of course, just as a plug, not just in Azure, but of course in multi cloud scenarios, if customers wanted that risk-based view of the permissions that were currently assigned, they could look at Microsoft Entra permission management, couldn't they, and get the kind of risk rating there to see the creep index of where customers may be overprivileged those accounts and services and workloads and work using them. So I love to see this in action. Are you able to show us a demo?
Yes, of course.
Amazing. Let's see it.
Let's go. So here we are on the Azure portal. So we are in a subscription. And now what I'm going to do is like, in this side, I'm the administrator, right? Like, so I have full permissions to create role assignments, and I want to delegate it to data, the picture that I show, right? So now I'm going to create a role assignment. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to create a role assignment. And then in here, we have privileged admin roles. So this is what I was mentioning before. So we have this tab where you can see, okay, what roles are privileged, meaning that had privileged permissions. We can see that the role-based access administrator is one, the user access administrator and another. So I select that one, which has permissions to create role assignments. Then I select data from here. It's the principal that I'm going to delegate Azure role assignments. So you will see here now a new thing, that you can add conditions to this role assignment. So the condition tab is going to show for any role, custom or built-in role that has the permission to create role assignment, the Microsoft authorization / role assignment / right. And I have that, I know that by heart. I didn't read it anywhere, the name of the permission. And then you, by default, we ask you to constrain it, right? Because it's a privileged role assignment. And then you can add conditions to it, right? Like, so you go here, you add conditions. We have templates, like we talk to customers, identify what are the toughest scenarios that they will use this, so that they can constrain this role assignment by only the roles that they can assign. So constrain roles. You can constrain the roles and the principal type. So here's where you can say only to reader and to service principals, or you can constrain it to the role and to the specific principal, right? So I can say only reader and only to these groups, or only to this set of service principals, right? So in our scenario, we're going to constrain it to data that you can only assign the ACR pull, ACR push, and only to service principals. So we select service principals. Now we're going to select the roles that we want data to assign, ACR pull, ACR push. Great. So, and then we complete the role assignment. We close this. We saved. Now you can see here the summary, that you can only assign it to the ACR pull, ACR push, and service principals. Okay, so this is what an admin will do on the UI. Now we're going to move. I'm going to see from data perspective what you're going to see, right? Like, so we log in as data. Now data is going to create role assignments. First thing you will notice is that data doesn't have the full list of roles, right? Like we filter by what you can do on the UI. So in here, you can only see the ACR pull, ACR push, because these the things that she can assign. So we're going to select the ACR pull role. Then now we're going to select to who we're going to assign that role. If you remember, we also put a condition that she can only assign it to service principals. So here you only see service principals, right? And then we select a service principal, and then Dara can complete the flow to create role assignments. And that's it, right? Of course, this is available through PowerShell, APIs, Bicep, everything that you use.
That's
Terraform.
amazing.
Yeah.
Terraform, sure. You know, go for it. That's amazing. Thank you very much. So, if you're interested in learning more about this, there's lots of public documentation. Also, there is another video on YouTube. So if you go to have a look there, it shows you more information. Go forth, share with your Azure admins, share with your internal and your friends and family. And yeah, definitely review them and see if you can reduce those privileges. If you've got any questions, please do drop us a message either on LinkedIn, Twitch, YouTube, wherever you are. Luis will be with us for another 5 minutes whilst we move on to the next section. So if you've got any more questions, we can come back to them. But for the time being, thank you very much, Luis. That was
so
very
much,
interesting. And yeah, we'll move on to the next item.
Awesome. So that was amazing, don't you think, Grace? I think it's a great way to kind of like, control and make sure that you have all of those privilege permissions in a way that you can limit what those permissions can do. It's just something very important. So let's discuss some of the other stuff, because now we're gonna switch into the things that went GA. And this is a good one. It's about continuous access evaluation for workload identities. If you're not familiar with what CAE is, or continuous access evaluation, just as a quick refresh, it's a modern authentication mechanism. So in all of the modern authentication mechanisms right now in the industry, you have what is an access token and a refresh token. Usually these access tokens, for the most part, are valid for 1 hour. With CAE, those access tokens will be revoked based on critical events, like things like I disable the account, there's location changes, and all of these different things. This feature went GA for workload identities. So workload identities is basically service principals and all of those non-human identities. So think about the possibilities of now being able to revoke those service principals on almost real time when there's certain things like elevated risk that was detected by identity protection, or something like that, right? You can enforce that revocation of the token almost in real time, and that's now in GA. If we go to the next one as well, we have another interesting thing around application instance lock for workload identities as well, around the same world of the workload identities, which is the ability to allow the app developers to protect those multi-tenant applications. I say this because it is important to consider that in a multi-tenant application, you do an app registration on the home tenant of the application, and every other organization that will consume that same application would only have a service principal over there. With the application instance locked, you have the capabilities to give developers that opportunity to lock out important properties, so they cannot tamper with specific things like the secrets or the keys that need to be relevant and not being modified there. For example, if I own an application in tenant A and you may use that application in your tenant B, unless there's a required scenario for which you are allowed to add a credential to the service principal, I, as a developer, should lock that critical properties on my service principal, on my app registration for that service principal that relies on all of the other tenants, because it's a multi-tenant app, right? So this will provide out of the box protection for those applications and the burden of app developers to have their own means to secure their application. And very easy to find on your app registrations. If you have a multi-tenant application, go to the authentication blade all the way at the bottom. You will find these. And of course, we have the UI and Graph API where you can configure this as well. Thank you for putting the banner out there. That's the link of these specific properties. We put a screenshot over there. We have ways to lock all of the properties or just a specific credential related properties. And I think the next one or the next feature that is going to be very interesting, and I can wait for you, Grace, to share like the things that we can do with the piece of web signing on Windows. So I'll
Yeah.
pass it over
So
to you.
before we move on to that, I do want to say what I love about application instance lock when we talk about workload identities is developers, right? They have a hard enough job as it is. Okay. The last time I did any kind of development, SharePoint was using an old framework. So like that's how long ago it was since anybody let me touch any code. And so the thing that I love about this is because it's out of the box, anything that you can take the burden off the developer for is a great thing. And so, you know, developers aren't identity specialists, much like identity specialists aren't app developers. So with bringing this in, and now that it's GA, you can, you know, go forth and use it. But yeah, it really moves that burden away from the app developers so that you can lock that for them. And it's, yeah, I think it's great. So moving on to a very exciting update. So this is something that's very close to my heart, mainly because I love anything that makes my customers' lives easier. So we are going GA with web sign-in, and that is where, when we talk about web sign-in, what we mean is it's a credential provided on the Windows lock or sign-in screen for an Azure AD joined or Microsoft Entra ID joined device that provides a web experience used for authentication, and then it will return an auth token back to the operating system to allow the user to unlock or sign into the machine. So what does that actually mean, right? Because, you know, that could just be a bunch of stuff. Oh yeah, it just uses the web, right? That's all it does. So with this, it supports things like tap, which is fantastic, as well as pin reset flow, on-demand web-based experience for credential recovery, and passwordless. So once configured via policy, it can remove the password from the entire user experience, both for device logon as well as in the session auth scenarios via the Cred UI. So this is huge. So this is in the latest Windows 11 update. I have put the quick link to the release information for this is from memory. It's H2 23. It's available at ak.ms/45show/W11 web sign-in. And so what does this look like for the end user? So I've got some handy demos here. So as you can see, trying to log on, we can go and click the second button in. And what we're going to do is the user's then going to be redirected. And you see this very familiar looking web sign-in box.
Yes.
Yeah, everybody's favorite. But no, you've never seen it at login. So now, right, you've got code match, passwordless, fantastic. So therefore, the user just goes to their mobile device, would enter the code that they've seen on the screen. And just like that, as we'd say in England, Bob's your uncle, you're in your device. And so that user has not had to provide a password, and they can use passwordless sign-in through their authenticator app, and it's seamless and it's a matter of seconds.
Very
so the
nice.
next user experience, I know it's beautiful, right? The next user experience that I want to show you, if I've got the order correct here.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you is like, what else? Like, because we're looking into like the look and feel of an Azure AD or Entra ID login screen, right? But apart from passwordless, so I assume that's what you were going to talk about as well.
Yeah, so with tap, so of course, if a user either has never been given a password or doesn't know their password and they need to get in securely using passwordless authentication, that's where temporary access passcode comes in. So you could either issue from, at join a temporary access passcode that can now be used to log on to this device, where they can then register other security information like, authenticator app, FIDO2 tokens, or if it's a case of recovery as well, they can get back in using tap to do whatever they need to. So this was a huge ask from my customers, especially those that are on their passwordless journey, because tap's not just a recovery method as well, it's also a great way to be able to, what's referred to as bootstrap, users' ability to add strong authentication and passwordless authentication to their devices without having their password. And last but not least, oh yeah,
I
no, go
think you
ahead.
mentioned it, but I was just going to plug in real quick. Like, this is for Microsoft Entra joint devices, right? So Microsoft
Yeah,
Entra hybrid joint devices. This is something that is not supported for this experience, correct?
yeah. And so here you can see, I think, let me have a look what we see in here. I think this is the pin reset flow, was it? Let me restart it. It moved too quickly and it's on my other screen. Oh yeah, so this is, if they do have their password, of course, they can use that as well if required, but you do have the ability as the administrator, if you want to remove that using, I think we've got the config is available in the documentation of how you can enable passwordless experience policy. So that's where you can still use your federated identities. So
Okay, so there it is.
yeah, there we go. So this is going to be available with the September release of Windows 11, which is 23H2. If you're part of the Insider Preview or any of those other programs, you may have already seen this. So if you're listening in live, let us know if you've been testing this. If you haven't, let us know if you're excited about it, how you plan to roll it out. I think this is really going to be an amazing thing to not just roll out across your estate, because I appreciate upgrading to Windows 11 and the latest version of Windows 11 is not necessarily a quick task in an enterprise, but at the very least you should be looking at, for new starters joining now, how can you implement this build alongside passwordless like TAP to actually make these your internal users passwordless from join. So yeah, have a think about that. If you've got any questions, let us know. Also, if you'd like to know more about this and a technical deep dive, let us know. We're taking requests. We can go and bug the feature PMs to come and join our show. So yeah, let us know. So next up, we have a few announcements. For those of you that were listening last week, we had a fantastic 425 show hosted by Mark and a couple of our marketing team, running you through what it means to rename from Azure Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID. So as that rollout is happening now, in fact, I had a call with a customer earlier that started noticing differences even between their pre-prod and their prod tenants, because the way that we roll out changes globally is in different rings. So if you have two tenants, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll take updates at exactly the same time, because it's the way that we safely deploy. And so you'll start seeing these names change across various Microsoft experiences over the next coming months. And in fact, they've already started to see that, depending on what your main portal of choice is. So here's just a highlight of what kind of the major changes are. So Azure AD free from a licensing perspective is still Microsoft Entra ID free. And then, you can probably apply the same logic as you move down. P1 is still P1, it's just Microsoft Entra ID P1. Azure AD P2 is Microsoft Entra ID P2, and Azure AD External Identities is Microsoft Entra External ID. And so if you want to learn more about how we did this and how we're going to be rolling it out, we've got a deep dive that's available at ak.ms/425show/ just ak.ms/how to rename Azure AD. I got new glasses. You never guess, would you? They said they made my prescription stronger. I'm not convinced. Anyway, so have a look at that. We'll put the link in the chat and you can have a look at the past show there. That goes through in a deep dive. It also has some really great resources for how we've created some scripts to help you see where you have these names and how they should be changed. And it's not just find and replace, because that would be too easy. There's also some logic in there to make sure that the names are suitably amended, because there are some nuances with some of the name changes. And overall, I think the important thing to note is we didn't just do this because we fancied keeping you all on your toes. It is synonymous with the fact that, back in the day, and still to, some people that I talk to, when you mention Azure AD, they're just like, oh, it's AD in the cloud, right? And I'm like, wrong, incorrect. You couldn't be more further from the truth. And so I think developing on that with the sheer amount of additional features and functionality that we've got, it was time for us to rename and fall in line as well with the other feature groups and product families that have amended their names to be more holistic. So the likes of Purview, those sorts of things. So because of that, that's why we decided it. And also it makes things a little bit simpler in terms of, when we look at licensing for customers and putting it into the security portfolio. So yeah, I'd love to hear any feedback. We've got a question. Do we have collective URLs for all these releases? So I assume, so it'd be great to hear a bit more about that. Do you mean releases in terms of the Azure AD name change? Because all the information can be found for the rebrand at aka.ms/AAD rebrand FAQ. But if that's not what you meant, please feel free to pop another message in the chat and we'll get back to you on that.
I think this is really important to highlight, right? Because I get these questions from all of the customers that I talk to. It's like, so why they're rebranding? Why the new name? Is it because, it's something changing? Is it something going away? But I think it's right on point to define, the why we're doing it and why it is important to understand the different umbrellas and the other stuff that you just mentioned. So I think it's amazing that you decided to put this here for the audience.
Yeah, and I think, and you're going to touch on it at the end, but when people are attending Ignite and watching back, it's important to note that we will just be talking about Microsoft Entra ID there. Like that's when that's the main milestone for us in terms of talking about and discussing our features with the new name. And that's largely when I think people can expect the majority of the portals to have changed as well.
And Peter has a good point here, right? The Azure AD name has caused massive confusion, and we're glad that people are behind this change and all that stuff. I can share that it's taken me some time as well. As you can tell, I probably already mentioned Azure AD instead of Entra ID on the same show. So we're all getting there, and I think it's important that understanding these changes are for better. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. Peter. Yeah, thank you, Peter. It's good to have a positive input on that. And I mean, I'll be honest, I've literally got a Post-it note on my screen, high tech as it is. And this is actually to remind me of all of the things. It's not just Entra ID. This is actually to remind me that Entra Verified ID, aka BC, DID, or Verified ID. So yeah, we're all human. We don't have a mental find and replace. I wish I did.
I think we should get a hashtag for that. Bring back Post-its or something like that, right?
Yeah, definitely. Low tech sometimes is just the easiest way. So the last announcement, I've got two final announcements. Yes, I'm a bit pixelated. I apologize. It's 5:30 in the UK, and so everybody's come home and has started streaming Netflix. So apologies. You're getting to see me in a very boxy way. So we've had some announcements that I thought I wanted to bring your attention to that are available in the message center, because for those admins that have to be held accountable of operational changes, I think it's important to make sure that if you're not, you should be checking the admin portal in admin.microsoft.com/admin portal, because we do post Microsoft Entra really important updates there. So the one that I want to bring your attention to today is that we're introducing a setting that allows admins to limit the number of snoozes to 3 as part of our nudge program. So nudge ultimately means that if we see users within your tenant that are using what we refer to as not slightly less strong auth methods like SMS and voice for MFA, we will nudge or promote to them to download and register for the Microsoft Authenticator app. And so now with this setting, you can actually control how many times a user can snooze it, and allow admins to limit the number of snoozes to. So this with, of course, it's quite hard to get end users to change their ways sometimes, and especially if you've just bought a new phone, or I don't know, you've just not got round to downloading the Authenticator app. This will help them kind of make it easier for them by putting it in the way. So what I would recommend doing is reviewing this setting, have a look to see how SMS and voice is being used, and then think about what your adoption campaign is going to be, and then leverage nudge to make it easier for end users to register that as part of their authentication experience, so that they're prompted to do that.
And it is important. I did get, or I have been getting a lot of questions about the registration campaign and notch and all that stuff, because it's a common thing to think that we always had a limitation on how many numbers or how many times the users could just snooze that, right? So this is an important change that I think all of our customers and audience should be aware. So
Yeah. And then last but not least, for my announcements, so did you know that we have an app gallery in Microsoft Entra ID, and every month we update and add new applications that are available to use in the gallery. So we're at thousands and thousands of pre-created app gallery apps that are available for you as a identity administrator to go in and configure. And that's not just for SSO, that's also for provisioning using SCIM. And so I just wanted to call out, we do update these every month, and the 4 that we've got this month are Recognize, never said that out loud, Datadog, SAP Litmos, and Postman. Of course, everyone knows Postman. And so they also now are available for you to go in and just click through rather than having to do all the custom configuration yourself. And the reason why I point this out is quite often, as people have been going on their SSO journey and integrating apps, there may have been apps that weren't integrated in the app gallery to start with. And so it may be worth going back and reviewing and seeing if any of your major apps are actually added to the app gallery now, because it may mean that it's just a little bit less overhead for you in terms of management going forward. And also when you're integrating new apps, do make sure you check the app gallery to see if it's already there. Also, we do listen to you. So if you do have an application that's not in the gallery that you would like us to add, we do take requests. So there is a link that's available in the app gallery where you can go and hit request a new gallery application, fill in the necessary form, and that goes straight to our integration team. They review it, and then if they deem it to be suitable, they'll go and add that in, and then in the next coming months you should hopefully see that available in the app gallery. So that's everything from me. I'm going to hand over now to you, Jorge, to just give us one final exciting reminder.
thank you. Yes. And a great reminder, by the way. So Microsoft Ignite 2023 is coming in November. So if you haven't checked it out, go now to ignite.microsoft.com. This is going to happen in person and online. Unfortunately, the online sessions have been sold out. But if you haven't registered, if you're still interested to join us at Microsoft Ignite with all of the announcements and all of the different things that we can discuss there, feel free to visit ignite.microsoft.com to discover what's next, what is the best things that we've been working on, not only for the identity space, but just entirely the entire Microsoft community and the entire Microsoft development and engineering team. So I wanted just to share that. That's kind of like the last thing that we're going to be discussing today. So thank you so much for locking in again and spending some time with us. We apologize a little bit for the upstream. I'm sorry that people get to see just me in HD instead of you, because that's kind of sad. But either way, so we have more upcoming shows. So if you have missed any of the previous shows, we have, visit aka.ms 425 show /YouTube. You're going to find all of our past shows. We have exciting shows coming up in the next few weeks. We're going to have identity protection, real-time token detection. That is a very interesting one. We're going to have a session around Entra permissions management. It was mentioned before, like how do you identify all of those permissions that have been given to certain users versus the one that they're actually using. So if you're interested in discovering more for multi-cloud environments, join us for that show. We also have a great one of L400 customization for logic apps using lifecycle workflows and entitlement management. So all of those extensibility customizations that you can do when you have access packages assigned to users or when you run all of these workflows that for the journey movie deliver scenarios. So that's going to be the end of today's show. So we would love to hear from you about what else do you want us to discuss on any other future show. So drop a comment on the on whether you are watching us from YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, and all of our platforms. Let us know any feedback. What do you think about the monthly updates? Are we missing anything? Would you like to see more? Let us know any questions as well. We're here to help you drive through all of these changes, and hopefully you're enjoying so far these sessions about changes and what's new in the next Entra ID capability. So Grace, I don't know if you have any other closing comments before we leave.
No, feel free to go and say hi to Chad, though. Chad Hasbrook from our team will be at the Ignite booth, so feel free to go and bug him and ask him all your really complex questions, or just go and say hey, whatever you feel like it. Yeah, don't forget, of course, if you haven't been fortunate enough to get a ticket, you can still log in online. I hear there's a really cool ADFS session going on. Is that right, Jorge?
There's going to be an ADFS surprise at Ignite.
Little surprise, yeah. So keep your eyes out, because it's one of us. And full disclosure, yes. I'm not getting on a plane, so
it's an on-demand session, but yes.
Yeah, well, spoiler alert, it's not me. And I wish I could come down, but I will be reviewing it from the the comforts of my basement in Manchester. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to Louise, our special guest today. Thank you for Nick on the production controls and everybody behind the scenes, making sure that this runs smoothly. If you've got any feedback, we'd love to hear it from you. And I look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you. See you next month.
Bye, everyone.